has your intuition always been so have you been able to trust your intuition so much since you were young, or is that something that's been developed?
Oh, it's something I think self-doubt is an inherent part of being a medium. It's also an inherent part of being a human being.
Yeah,
And
right.
there is something to be said about being able to trust
Mhm.
humbly and to kind of go from a place of faith to trust. And I've kind of learned that in this work, I always run the risk of being wrong. There's often a fear of humiliation, and it just kind of comes with the territory. So one really has to be comfortable with themselves to take those risks, knowing that it's worth it, knowing not so much about what would happen if one's wrong, but what if one is right, and how that can help a person move forward.
From the work that I've seen, it seems like your mother had a really big impact on you growing up, created an environment for you to feel safe to allow yourself to go down this path to begin with. I know that you were bullied growing up in school, so how was that self-belief kind of cultivated for you early goings?
Well, I think being an only child helped in the sense that I very much beat to my own drum kind of from the get go. And in many ways learned that the very thing that got me bullied, the very thing that in many ways caused me to be isolated and to not have friends,
Mhm.
became the thing once I held on to it long enough that did get me friends, that did get me, people coming and saying, we want to know more. So I think there is something to be said about authenticity, and that very often when we are identifying what makes us unique, it's very often the things that we deal with the most pushback on. We go against the grain in certain respects. And when we do, people respond to that. So having the courage to identify what scares you in yourself, I think is very powerful. And ultimately sticking to your guns and being true to who you are, as cliche as it is, can allow you to really change the world as a result.
Yeah, so true. I can imagine you started really young, and to think that you've been doing this for over a decade, right? Like, around there?
Yes, absolutely. I'm 28 now and got the show when I was 18. And it's just so surreal how time has flown. How old are you?
I'm 20. So,
How
like,
amazing!
yeah,
You
like,
are already like leaps and bounds ahead of everyone. That is so amazing.
I
Congratulations.
appreciate that. I appreciate that immensely, and I'm curious for you, like, because it still feels like you're so early on, and maybe that's just my perspective.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you got started so early, but you don't see it often, especially to the level that you were able to cultivate it. So, how has your relationship with yourself changed? Because I can imagine getting that much fame that quick. You couldn't really like. How did that change you?
Well, I will say I'm very lucky to have a strong support system. I have my mom and my dad and my partner and dog and cat and birds. And for me, I think it's been very important when I did get a pretty high level of success at an early age to ensure that I didn't equate myself to what I was achieving. I think it's very natural for people who want to be more in this world to sometimes equate themselves to what they succeed at doing. And I
Mhm.
learned very quickly that no matter how much I could succeed in one respect, there were always going to be other respects that humbled me, that reminded me, to not get lost in the sauce, so to speak. And I think having a strong support system was really integral to that. But by and large, I mean, there's something to be said about being right, and like mediums have to avoid being know-it-alls.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's very interesting kind of dynamics there where you are humbled by the work, or at least should be, I think, in order to do it the right way.
Yeah. Is there something that you believed in the beginning of your journey of being a medium that you no longer believe in now, or something that you changed your mind on?
I used to think that everybody could do readings on some level. When I started, was under the impression that intuition was something everybody has. And I do believe everybody has an intuition.
Mhm.
But as a youngin, I was told, oh, everybody could do a reading if they just kind of got in touch with it enough. And then I started going and seeing psychics and mediums and having firsthand experiences and realizing that it's not as common as it is claimed to be. And so that, definitely was an evolution. But if anything, it's allowed me to see value in what I do. And then when I come across people who do genuinely have the ability to connect with other people, it's like, it feels so comforting and really nice to be able to see someone who I can relate to on some level.
You visited about 200 in the beginning of your journey, right? Around there, and you
That's right.
realized, like, there was a lot of people that saying they were something, but weren't actually practicing what they said they were.
And then the interesting thing too is you learn there's a lot of overlap, right? So you'd have people who were like legitimate kinda and then fake kinda. And
Right.
being able to tell the difference was really tricky because within a generic reading, there would be elements of specificity that time and time again would go on to happen. So I learned also through that experience to not view things so black and white,
Mm.
to be able to kind of appreciate the gray area, in the sense that I don't really have to believe or disbelieve to get value from something. Um, things value is not dependent on my belief in them.
Dive deeper into that. What do you mean by that? Because I love that perspective. Seems like you don't hold on to anything as
Yeah.
absolute, which I like.
Yeah, I try to really just keep an open mind. I generally view belief as a momentum force,
Mm.
versus something to kind of integrate into our ego. Like I hold on to this belief. I use belief more as a tool to get a result. So when I go and I do a reading, I have to kind of get into an altered state of consciousness where I am of complete belief, of
Mm.
complete trust. And that's something that I've had to work towards, but something that you can kind of tinker with. So often we are focused on, okay, what's true, what's not, what's real, what's fake, what's black, what's white. And
Yeah.
you realize when you start delving into the paranormal that by design, these things kind of intermix to cloak themselves, to keep themselves concealed on some level to the general public, and kind of slow drip itself into exposure.
Yeah, it's very true. Most things aren't absolutes, but we see them as such, and so that is the color of the glasses that we see life through, which is difficult. You you grew up as someone that didn't really have a role model, not only in like your personal life, but professional, most importantly, because that's the thing that's really built you to have the platforms that you have now. What was that like, kind of figuring out your own identity while, like you said, you didn't really attach your achievement to your identity, which I feel
Sure.
could be really difficult, especially at a young age as well.
Yeah, it was really weird. These things would just kind of happen to me. I didn't really view them
Yeah.
as me being responsible for it. It just seemed like one weird synchronicity after another. And every
Right.
reading is really just one weird coincidence after another. I say things that don't mean anything to me, but they mean something to the person I'm talking to. So it was really a journey of self development, of identity, of being able to really have courage, to not be afraid, to stick to what makes one different. There's this old adage of, you can be the biggest, juiciest peach, and
Mm.
there's still going to be people who don't like peaches. And I had to come to terms with that. I think in many ways I was unique, in being, a minority, in my sexuality. That kind of prepared me on some level for what it was like dealing with opposition. I grew up in a very conservative environment, and so you do learn, on some level, the value, the strength, the diamonds that are created through the pressure.
Yeah. The thought of, and I love that peaches example. I've heard you say that before, and I really align with it too. It makes a lot of sense. I think one thing that I've heard you speak about is the difference between faith and trust. And I
Yeah.
think that there's a big distinction between that. And a lot of people lean on faith, like this blind faith in life. And for some people, it's a good thing. For some people, it's helpful.
Yeah.
What's your viewpoint on that? Because I know religion and spirituality are two different kind of separate roads to go down.
Sure. Yeah, I think that when it comes to the conversation around faith, I at least view faith as more of an external thing that
Mm.
generally has more connotations around doctrine, ideology, and kind of having to take one's word for it. And that's faith.
Yeah.
For me, trust is something that can be experienced firsthand. When people have personal, noetic, mystical experiences that reflect a direct relationship to their divinity, it
Mhm.
creates a reinforcement that is more than someone just telling you, or encouraging you to take their word for it. And so I think it's one of those things that Carl Jung, one of the forefathers of psychotherapy,
Mhm.
talked about, the ineffable quality, the quality beyond words that these experiences have. They act as threshold knowledge. So when someone has a genuine spiritual experience and they go from maybe not being a believer in anything to at least being a little bit more open, you can't really go back. It's kind of like a threshold we step over. And as we do, we kind of continue to develop and evolve. But spiritual experiences allow for those to kind of happen in a way that transcends belief.